Testing, testing, one, two, three. Dr. Scott Lyons, thank you for coming on the show. I'm stoked to have you here, man. And thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Where do we start? I think, the context of this conversation is, trauma is a hot word right now. We're going to talk about trauma. We're going to talk about somatic therapy and embodiment, working with the body to attempt to heal trauma. So, you are, of all the people that I should be talking to, I've heard that you're the guy. And my audience hasn't heard about this yet on the show, particularly. And, it's due time that we dig into this topic specifically. So, let's do this thing. Tell me what it is that you do in the world and how you came to this. And if you can take 20 minutes if you want.
I sort of bill myself as a somatic therapist, somatic coach, and really teach embodiment work. And those are, those, like you said, like trauma, those have become kind of buzzwords. And so it might be helpful to kind of break them down, and then I'll go back and say where, my journey intersected with those.
Please.
So soma means the body, and somatic essentially is the practice or the practices of coming into the experience of our body. Now, we are innately embodied beings, meaning that we experience and feel and are aware of our body. And there are things in our path and our journeys and our life that get in the way of experiencing ourselves, that become like roadblocks or veils into experiencing our essential being, our even our feelings or the sensations of our body. And that sometimes we can even call that trauma. And so essentially, when we're doing even like trauma work, which we'll, as you said, we'll talk about later, we're coming back into our sense of embodiment, the ability to be present, to experience, to feel, to communicate, to express all that is happening within us. And so my journey with that is, and before I even talk about, my journey, there's this great quote that says, how do we know what we know? How do we know what we don't know?
Mm-hmm.
And that really pertains to somatics and embodiment, because one of the things that happens with trauma is, and when we become less embodied or disembodied or
Mm-hmm.
dissociated, is that we aren't actually aware of it. It's a protective mechanism to not be aware of what our body is holding.
Right.
And so for someone like me or many of us in the world who experienced maybe early traumas, we don't know that. We don't know any different. We don't know that we are necessarily out of our connection with our body, or disembodied or dissociated. And so we see symptoms of that in the world. We might see that as disruptive behavior, or we might see it as learning disabilities, which was very much, my experience growing up, where I had severe learning disabilities, where I was told very early on I would be lucky if I even graduated high school.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
and what that was not actually learning disabilities in the classical concept that we might think of, but actually trauma responses or dissociative responses or disconnections within myself that manifested in these various ways of like not being able to focus, unable to communicate what I need, and those type of challenges and issues. And
Yeah.
I
If I could
yeah,
just add some relatability from my end, or try to tap into
please.
other people and on this piece, like, I mean, I can very much relate to what you're talking about, about how struggling in the school system,
Yeah,
and struggling with attention
yeah,
and not being able to sort of conform to the system as it's laid out gets
yeah,
labeled as learning disability or a oppositional defiant disorder. In my case, it was
yeah,
ADD. My
Yeah.
brother was diagnosed with ADHD, and we were both medicated.
Hmm.
And what that looked like was just sort of like acting out, attention seeking, being loud or distractible.
Yeah.
I was sort of a comedian in the classroom,
Yeah.
and uh, it, from the top down, I'm sure I was just annoying. I was just annoying to the adults around me. Like they didn't know what to do with me. And,
Yeah.
in the 90s, what they did with kids like me was they gave them drugs,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
still happening now. And so I get the diagnosis, I get the drugs take my appetite away. I feel like a zombie. And
Yeah.
outwardly, it looks like the problem is solved. And inwardly, I feel more disconnected from myself. I feel less like who I am
Yeah.
than I already did, which was a problem.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
the problem is never really resolved. So
Yeah.
I feel you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And I know that one of your specialties is an addiction, and that's another manifestation of how these, this interruption of being embodied, of being connected, manifest.
Mm,
I remember saying to my mom, maybe as a 12-year-old, I begged her to get me off the medications
mm,
because I just said, I'm not human. I know that this is moving me away from what I need. And eventually they let me come off the medication. And it was about the time that I started that they put me in dance school.
right.
And, and I remember coming home from dance and feeling more organized, like I could do my homework all of a sudden, and that I could um, that I could focus for longer in school, that I had something I was excited about, as opposed to just feeling disconnected from other people in the world. And it it really started to make a significant difference. That people, I remember a babysitter pointing out to my mom that something had changed, that suddenly Scott, me, was able to like sit down and watch a TV show for once.
Mm,
And um and so my parents, did what any good parent would do, and put me in a lot more dance.
yeah.
and, and that was my medicine for quite a bit of time. They put me in theater and the arts in ways I could put channel this sort of energy, and which is a great approach, except that it wasn't fully the picture. It wasn't that I just needed to channel all this extra energy. It was that I needed to channel it back to being in my own body and in myself. And I was, when I was in high school, um, I had excelled at the sciences, and so I was able to go to the university during the evenings and take classes. And I tell this part of the story because it was very appropriate to where I was at, that someone was peeling a unripe banana next to me in a class, and I melted down. I started crying and I ran out of the room. Like
Huh.
I couldn't integrate that type of sensory noise at the time either. It was just another symptom of being kind of disconnected and challenged.
Oh, interesting. So, like, I'm trying to put this together. So, you were sitting in a classroom setting. It was quiet, and you needed to focus. And the
Yeah,
banana peeling, it's like pushed you over the
so
edge because
loud. Yeah,
whatever on that day was like so stressed. You were already
yeah.
perhaps stressed out.
Yeah, I was way over my head in the biopsychology class as a 15-year-old.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And yeah,
So yeah, you were
and
like, oh, this reaction here is like way
it didn't seem
unca
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
and and thank gosh it happened. Had she not had that banana, I would have never ran out of that room. And the only class that hadn't started in the university, I was put in because I had to take classes, and that class was a class on somatics in the dance department.
Oh.
And so it was kismet. It was a class called Body Mind Centering, and I suddenly I was in these classes and suddenly felt like I was home. Like there were these brief little moments where I felt like it was safe enough and tangible enough to be in my body, I wasn't watching the world from above myself or from imagining what could happen in the world. It was more literally embodied.
Mm.
And that was my first taste of somatics. And I ended up doing that entire program called Body Mind Centering, which took about 10 years. That the whole practitioner teacher training was 10 years.
Wow.
And it shifted everything. All the learning disabilities that had I'm using quotes here, the learning disabilities that I had been diagnosed with um, disappeared. I didn't have the dyslexia, I didn't have the ADHD. I could focus, I could be in relationship with another person without cringing. And it seemed, I think, like from the outside that it was a miracle.
Mm.
Um, because in that time, somatics was it wasn't very known. And so if a child didn't get better with medication, then it couldn't be explained, essentially, at that
Uh-huh.
time. And so for a lot of people around me, they couldn't figure out why there had been such significant changes. I mean, now we have people like Gabor Mate and Bessel and Peter Levine and all these incredible scholars and practitioners who've helped us explain the science of somatics and embodiment. But at that time, that it really wasn't around. So it
Mm.
seemed kind of miraculous that all of a sudden I really could focus. I could go to school for an entire day without having to take long breaks,
Yeah.
all the things that, you know, eh, yeah.
So, for anybody who's not fully following this, a show that you need to watch immediately is called The Wisdom of Trauma.
Mm,
You can find it online. You can pay to. I think you have to pay to watch it at this point. But the the concept here is that when something happens to you when you're younger that you cannot process through
yeah,
your body,
metabolize. Yeah,
metabolize it, you can't put it into a context. Let's say
yeah,
in your life, you can't sort of put it in its place. It doesn't make sense. It was, there was maybe lots of fear, or there was some pain that was not processed. A type of fragmentation happens in your system, in your human system, and you have to sort of break off a piece of yourself in order to just like keep functioning when something like that happens to you. um, and like some of the worst kinds of things that you could imagine would be like being raped or being beaten really badly. And a lot of people understand how humans dissociate in those moments. They'll just leave, essentially like leave their body. They'll just
yeah,
and that's a normal response to something that's just too much for the nervous system to handle. And so how that looks in adulthood is people who, you know, perceptively, it seems like their nervous systems are fried in some way. They're sort of disconnected from their body in some way, um, and that might be in terms of learning, or it might be in terms of attention. Like it might even be. And this doesn't have to come from severe trauma. It's just a severe example that I'm using, but even for me, like there's something about when my partner is like bringing her feelings to me and her frustrations about her relationship, my eyes just glaze over, and all of a sudden I lose all empathy, and I'm like, I can't feel her at all. And she's like, are you feeling me right now? I'm like, yeah. She knows I'm not feeling her. I'm like, I don't know how to get out of this trance state right now. There's a disembodying that's happening in that moment. I'm
yeah,
still unweaving, the origins of that stuff and working to heal it. But basically, many of us, through these adverse childhood experiences, can end up sort of being like the parts of us are sort of blown to pieces. There's
yeah,
like a part over there, there's a part over here, and it shows up as like having these sort of like computer glitches when you're trying to work in the world. Like
yeah,
you're in a situation that feels very normal for everyone else, and for some reason that your nervous system is just like bugging out because of
yeah,
it. There's a piece that's not sort of, there's like something missing from the puzzle. So if you're listening to this and you're just try to take this like somatic lens on whatever problem you've seen in your own life or in a person who's close to you, like, okay, so like what disintegration could have happened in the earlier years that's now showing up as this now, you know?
Mm.
um, because this is not I don't think your story is terribly unique.
No.
We all have some version of a childhood adverse experience that carries with us into adulthood, and some of us have more than others, and some had really intense stuff happen. But
Yeah.
this is a very relatable situation, for me, from my
Yeah. I
perspective.
mean, how many of us have ever driven down a highway and then just kind of glazed over and forgot to go off our exit? Like that's a mini version perhaps of disconnecting. Now, imagine living kind of your life like that. And some of us do, or
Hmm.
some of us have, where it's like we're constantly missing the exit, so to speak.
Right.
We're glazing over, disconnecting from people. Here but not here is kind of a saying that goes along with disconnection or dissociation or
Yeah.
disembodiment.
Yeah. So, okay. So, what does somatic therapy, somatic healing, like, how does it work? What's the
Sure.
idea here? Because, and, how does it differ from what most people know or think healing looks like, which is kind of like sitting in a therapist's office and like talking through your problems and having some cries,
Yeah.
and then you feel better and,
Yeah.
things are sort of healed.
Well, let's take the example of like riding a bike. At one point, you had to learn how to ride a bike, right? And then all of a sudden, you don't have to think about it. You just automatically ride the bike.
Mhm.
It's like integrated into your being, and you don't think about it. You can wave to people while you're riding. Everything's, you know, easier. Trauma is similar in the same way. So an experience can happen, and then it becomes kind of part of your system. It becomes automatic, and the defense or protective mechanisms that negotiate or navigate that energy, let's say, continue to ride out through your body and through your system.
Mm.
So that's how we can look at how something from childhood comes into adulthood, is because it becomes almost integrated. And in order to uh, unlearn how to ride a bicycle, or unlearn or unwind, we could say, that trauma holding, we have to go into a specific access point. And that specific access point is through the body, or what we could call the subconscious or the implicit. There's all kind of different words we might use. So if we think about um, our language, we all speak at least one language, likely English or Spanish or Russian or Portuguese. Um, that we might consider our mother tongue or our primary language. That's actually not quite right.
Hmm.
So our first language, our first universal language, is sensation and breath. And the expression of that is through sound and movement. As babies, our first language is sensation.
Mhm.
That is what we call the somatic language.
Right.
We experience it. Before we can talk, we experience. So it's not through English or Spanish or Russian or any of that that we understand ourselves or express. It is through this primal language, and those who've done like breath work or movement rituals, like you're getting into that primary language, and something in you just feels like it's satisfied
Uh-huh.
because you are returning back to your primal language
Hmm.
as a human being.
Yes. Yeah, that rings very true for me. I've had some I've had some very powerful psychedelic experiences in my
Mm-hmm.
life where like
Yeah.
I literally I lose my language. I don't know my
Yep.
name anymore, and but I am still here, and
Yeah.
I might be around other people usually,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
interacting with them, and I'm interacting with my body, and there's this
Yeah.
like very animalistic look back to the deepest roots
Yeah.
experience that I have.
Yeah.
And um, so I know what you're talking about. So when you say that, that really hit home for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. It's like in some ways we I think we don't give infants enough credit for like being able to sense and understand their environment until they can start
Yeah.
sort of talking. But like that is the original language; is it's all body language, and
Yeah.
I think it's easy to forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have, we can add to that touch. These are our primary means of expression at that point: sound, touch, movement. And so think about it. We go through school and we move further and further and further away from our primary language. And what that does is it teaches us these other great tools, with these very cognitive capacities, the ability to, to measure and to make meaning and to function, to write checks and whatever you need at that point. But it doesn't teach us how to be in touch with ourselves in that primary language. And in that primary language is our feelings, our emotions,
Yeah.
our compass of direction for our lives,
Yeah.
our intuition. These are all kind of different words that we might use, but this is the internal language of our body. And it guides us and it is signals. So when you have some type of sensation in your body, like you walk into a room and your gut kind of like, crunches up, that is a signal of the intelligence and this primal language expressing, communicating, I don't feel safe here, or something doesn't feel right, or whatever it is that it is saying. And so somatics is the process of getting us back into our primal language, getting us back into our body so we can feel it, so we can sense it, so we can make meaning of it, so we can action from it.
Hmm.
And so, in terms of therapy, all the intention is to get us back into our body so we can process all of the sensations that have yet to be processed, unfinished business.
Hmm.
But that unfinished business isn't like story per se, it's sensation or body story that is unfinished.
Right. That makes so much sense. You know, it makes so much sense when when you think about like a 3 or a 4 year old experiencing some very difficult event. You know, maybe an adult hurt them in some way. You know, the group of people that's here to protect you turned on you, hurt you,
Yeah.
and and that's there in your system as an adult. The idea of sitting down and talking it out with someone and imagining that you're going to come to some sort of healing in your body with that, it's, you know, using this frontal part of your brain that didn't even exist at the time that that happened to you. It actually makes some sense that that's kind of like a almost a wrong approach. Like it would be very difficult to use that approach unless you can really tap someone into their body, into that part of their brain that existed at the time that the trauma occurred.
Yeah. So it's like using a secondary language to understand a first
Right.
primary language. It doesn't really work so well. So it's what we call a top down approach, which
Mhm.
you know the somatics is what's called a bottom up approach. So we go from sensation, connecting to sensation, into understanding its meaning.
Uh-huh.
And when we have, let's say, like an impact, uh, you know, even as adults, that's too big or too much, or it's just too much or too big, or we don't have enough resources. We have that splitting, the
Mhm.
splitting between what happened and the sensation. And the sensation gets locked in the body until it is safe to process and metabolize. It's a brilliant approach. Like, until it
Mhm.
is safe, we won't metabolize this because we don't have the resources. So let's wait for the resources. That's the natural intelligent encoding of our body. The problem is we don't necessarily know how to go back once we have the resources, or where, how do we access. And that's where a lot of somatic therapy comes in, is going, you build up the resources so you get a person to a point where they can feel safe in their environment.
Uh-huh.
enough to be able to enter into their internal environment, to their body, to start to metabolize, to process that impact that couldn't be broken down or metabolized before, because there either it wasn't safe enough, there wasn't enough permission or safety or support or resources.
Right. Yeah. I'm picturing somebody who has, diagnosed PTSD, has a major trauma or multiple major traumas in the past,
Yeah,
who is easily triggered and
yeah,
easily sent into sort of a stress tailspin in their
yeah,
system,
yeah.
right? It's kind of what you were describing with the banana peel, and I've known many people like this who, depending on the situation, depending on the trigger, everybody has their own triggers.
Sure.
It might come up in relationship. It might come up in societal, in social situations. Might come up when there's a bang nearby.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
if your trauma is a car accident, or it might be, being near a car, getting into a car that triggers, and then there's this sort of downward spiral in your system, right?
Yeah,
And you just kind of go into shutdown.
yeah,
One of the traditional issues with trying to deal with people's trauma, trying to heal trauma, is that when you try to go there with the person, you try to talk to them about it, even, or you get them to put themselves there, they get too stressed out, they get triggered, and then you can't access it. And
yeah,
so, how does somatic therapy uh, get people to a place where, I think maybe you were touching on it around
yeah,
like giving people the resources, but
yeah,
what does that look like?
yeah. So some very common practices. Once you who as you're listening to this, you'll go, "Oh yeah, I've done something like that." Um, Something like a grounding practice. So even right now, can you turn your attention to where your body's contacting the ground, the supporting surface beneath you? And then going a little further, can you let yourself be received by that support? Can you let some of the weight of your body move into that support? So, one of the ways we might even experience a sense of presence in our own body is through weight.
Hmm.
I don't mean kind of like a dead weight, but actually a sense of weighted presence, like our organs aren't being held, our muscles aren't being held and rigid, but that the weight can move into support and we can feel supported, which is a grounding approach. um, there's a lot of practices about boundaries and healing a sense of protectiveness, in healing or mending whether an imaginary boundary or physical boundary, because often, like in trauma, boundaries have been deeply violated or challenged. So we're not jumping into the trauma event or experience. We're building up, like, can we find ground again? Can we find a sense of being supported? Can we reaffirm a sense of boundary where I can say yes or no, where I have agency or
Hmm.
control again? Um, there's lots of movement practices about, when in a stress response, um, something that happens is that you know cortisol and adrenaline and all those get released in order they build up a amount of energy in your body to action. And so when an action is thwarted because they're for a multitude of reasons, which is what happens often in trauma when it's a power struggle.
Hmm.
So when we're not able to action that energy, it just comes back at our own, and held within ourselves.
Yeah.
And so movement, coming back to our primal language and letting some of that energy be moved. And I don't mean moved through just talking, actually just moved out. Like if you've ever gone and had an amazing workout,
Hmm.
just like, like you had a bad day and you just worked out, or you went for a great swim, a great run, or went to a dance class and just moved it out. You're like, it's just gone. We can
Yeah.
do that. That's part of somatic therapy, is helping someone tap into the unprocessed energy that got activated,
Hmm.
in a stress response and help them just move it out. We don't have to talk about it to
Yeah.
move it.
Okay. That's really
Yeah.
helpful. Yeah. Just to relate to where my mind is going here while you're talking about this.
Yeah.
I've had I've had a few arguments with my wife in the time we've been together, and I have I'm a pretty avoidant type. I
Sure.
will I sort of go into shut down, and I feel like she's coming at me, and
Mm.
she's coming at me trying to resolve the issue, and I'm like powering down, and I will, in the past I would like leave the
Yeah.
house. Now I
Yeah. Yeah.
tend to just like maybe take a minute in another room or a little bit of time. But I remember there was a few times where we had pretty large blowouts, and then I would go to the gym and I would just have a solid workout and a sauna just in my own space. And after the
Mm-hmm.
sauna, I do a cold shower. And then when I'm sitting there meditating after the cold
Mm-hmm.
shower, there's this sense of peace and
Mm-hmm.
reintegration. And I
Mm-hmm.
was able to look at the situation very clearly in my
Yep.
mind. I was able to look at the situation without my heart rate going up,
Yeah.
which is like a really interesting sign, that like there's not as much stress there anymore, and then I could go home and speak with her and resolve things. And so
You
now when you're
resource to build capacity.
yeah, so now I'm
Yeah.
starting to get that, like, yeah, there was like an avoidant pattern there, but
Yeah.
at the same time I did go and I did the thing that I needed to do in my body so that
Yeah.
I could sleep well that night. Like
Yeah.
I had integrated the thing, and
Yeah.
I had a friend the other day who had a really big conflict with another friend who, they hung out, and the one friend resented the other guy for something that he said during the
Sure.
time they were together, and sent him a text afterwards and said, "Hey, like, I got to put up a boundary, around this, we're spending time together. I don't like that you said this." And he sent him a big long text, and the friend who received it, has some trauma around rejection from others, and uh, froze
Mm.
froze over the course of a few days, didn't
Mm.
reply, didn't send anything, had a lot to say, but just
Sure.
sort of froze. And as a result, spent over a week in a pretty shut down state, like just kind
Yeah.
of fried, like
Yeah.
like your banana story, right? And I've since processed the thing with both friends and
Yeah.
a close group of guys. And what the guy who received it learned is like, oh, actually, I needed to do something. I needed to express, and what I'm picturing now is like, oh, this guy, like, I hope he had some of the tools to like move his body, and like process energetically what had come up, as well as expressing what he needed to express in the moment, even if it wasn't perfect,
Yeah.
uh, because that sort of blockage, like what you're mentioning is it's the main issue,
Yeah.
that block,
Yeah.
so opening up the channel to expression of some kind, and
Yeah.
having as many tools as you can
Yeah.
is kind of the ticket to at least releasing some of the blockages that
Yeah.
come up, the triggers that come up day to day.
Yeah. I mean, in so much ancestral medicine, you'll see it in so many different cultural um, medicines. There's sounding, there's movement, there's chanting, there's all of these primal expressions to help release those energies. And like I grew up primarily in America, and it certainly was not part of my culture, you know.
Hmm.
And so it was very academic and cognitive culture where uh, coming back to movement certainly helped me come back home into myself. And yeah, and so just to respond about your friend, it sounded like certainly he needed something to help thaw out that freeze and find some expression for himself before he could even come back to his friend and express that sort of what he needed to share.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a friend who does something called trauma sensitive yoga, and
Mm-hmm.
it's she works with people who, for whom even traditional yoga may be triggering, or they might have stuff coming up that they don't know how to process. She helps sort of facilitate, like, what are you feeling now in your body, and what do you need to feel safe, you know,
Yeah.
and just that practice of tuning in, I think is it makes sense that this is emerging now because we need it so badly. Like
Yeah.
we're so disembodied, and my friend Jeevan was telling me the other day, he's like, think about it, like the screens are just getting closer and closer to us. Like they started out there, like first they were projectors on whatever 9 millimeter film or whatever it's called,
Yeah. Yeah.
or 60 millimeter, I can't remember. And then they were on the TV screen, and then they were on
Yeah.
the laptop, and
Yeah.
now it's on the phone, and pretty soon it's going to be VR, and then it's
Yeah.
just going to be inside your brain. You're just going to have the screens in there. Maybe you'll get it like on glasses, but they're getting closer and closer, and we do seem to be getting, as a whole,
Yeah.
more and more like disembodied and disconnected from ourselves.
Yeah, there's a high correlation with pediatrics or kids between higher depression rates with more screen time, and one of the elements of that is that they're not able to mobilize their feelings, the stored up energy, the stresses of their day, that it's being essentially stagnated in their
Right.
bodies, and so that heaviness or that inflammation that's caused from that manifests as what we call depression, or what we might diagnose as depression. But underneath that label is really this stagnation, this inflammation within their body of all these things that have built up that have been unprocessed,
Hmm.
unmoved.
Hmm.
And if you think about it, it's like as more stimulus is coming in and taking up the space, where do they go? There's only so much space. It's like it's
Yeah.
pushing us out of our own body.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it makes some sense, right? And
Yeah.
so I'm sensing that one of your messages here is that like the ticket to wellness is embodiment. Like spend more time in your body, moving, like checking in with yourself, listening to your gut.
Yeah.
Um, that experience you described of a person walking into a room and their gut doing a thing.
Yeah.
I think people listening to this can relate to something like that. You enter a situation and your body says something, and then you just ignore that and you move through
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And maybe you regret that afterwards because
Yeah.
there was something there for you that you were, not listening, that you were sensing that you were not
Yeah.
listening to, and you would have been better off to listen to your intuition. So, um, just spending more time in your body,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
it will make you an overall healthy human being.
Yeah.
And there's a thousand different ways to do that.
Yeah.
One of the guys I wanted to have on the show at some point is a guy who's dealt with his mental illness, like a certifiable diagnosed schizophrenia,
Mm.
via just being an outdoor athlete, like
Yeah.
just constantly outside on backpacking trips.
Yeah.
But that's how he manages his chemistry. He
Yeah.
moves his body as he needs. He just responds to the call, and he heads out whenever he needs to head out.
Yeah.
And other than the fact that he spends a lot of time on trail, he leads a good life, a normal
Yeah.
life, unmedicated.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is another inspiring story of someone who's just like they're using that embodied experience to heal what they need to heal in the moment.
Yeah. I mean, embodiment is also communing with our, there's our nature as human beings, but there's also nature communing with nature as a whole, and that's also a form of embodiment. Because,
Hmm.
I mean, not to get too esoteric, but we are that. We are nature, and so reconnecting to all aspects of our own nature is health.
Yeah. So, when
Yeah.
a person is identifying with what you're talking about, they're like, "Yeah, Ben and Scott are talking about this like disembodiment, feeling
Yeah.
triggered easily, and therapy has not really been working for me that well. I've been seeing my therapist for 4 years, and I'm not sure if I'm making progress." And you know, what is this? I need a guide. What is this somatic therapy? Where can I find a somatic therapy, a therapist? What do you recommend people do when they're getting into their search?
Yeah. Um, there's a lot of different types of somatic therapies that have emerged, certainly over the last 20, 30, 40 years even. And some well-known ones are somatic experiencing, sensory motor psychotherapy. Sorry,
Mm.
Hakomi,
Mm.
and there's other, there's certainly other therapies like dance movement therapy. There's
Right.
dance, certainly traditional dance therapy. There's somatic yoga, which we can get into the details around the original intention of yoga being much more
Uh-huh.
about embodiment.
Right.
And so when I say somatic yoga, I'm more referring to the more original intentions of coming
Right.
into our essential nature, but certainly just moving our body, and not in a way that's just mechanical. Like if you raise your arm up without thinking about it or connecting, there's kind of a mechanicalness of it. So, versus like if you start to melt your attention or your focus into that arm and feel how it's connected even to the rest of your body, and then lift your arm up and just even notice the
Mm.
difference.
Yeah.
Like perhaps even notice what it feels like to have this part of you be that much more connected to more of you.
Mm-hmm.
Now we might say, who cares? Except that if you go back to the language used earlier, Ben, around fragmentation, and if you think about what it would look like to walk around as a fragmented human being, you might start to have some sense of why this matters. Why would it be important to feel more whole and integrated, to not be fragmented, to be able to organize your whole body mind into whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, the research says, just to answer who cares, why care,
Yeah.
is that all of these things, simply actually feeling more connection from one part of your body into the other, has a huge ramification of things like self-esteem, even math skills, um, a sense of comfort in the world. Like when we're comfortable in our body, we're more comfortable in the world. Think about when you're really sick, like you have a bad cold or flu, and you're just like, the whole world kind of sucks.
Yep.
Now, imagine just when you feel better, it's all of a sudden like people seem nicer. You want to go hang out with, at a coffee shop again or wherever. It's the same concept here, is that when we're more in our body, we have better boundaries, we have better self-esteem, we're making more informed decisions, we have better performance. So for those who care about like even athleticism or performance in terms of jobs, actually the studies show that people who do more meditation, mindfulness, somatics outperform those who don't.
Right. And you'd have better relationships. Right?
Hopefully, fingers crossed. But you have
I-
more opportunity to figure out what's happening in the challenge of the relationship.
yeah.
And that's the gold here, is like otherwise we're kind of walking with like a blanket over our head.
Mhm.
We don't know what we don't know, and so we're just keep making the same mistakes essentially in relationship. And so somatics is about attuning inward first and then having the skills to attune to another human being in that way with that same awareness.
Yeah. And that, I think that's an important piece for me and the guys that I work with. A lot of
Yeah.
guys that sort of cross my path. I coach guys who often they come to me and we do like an intro session or an intro call, and they're like, "Hey, I'm in a relationship and I'm seeing that I'm running the same patterns that I was 10 years ago. I'm kind of checked out in my life. My partner wants more from me. I don't know how to give it to her. When she's asking me to give her more, I'm zoned out and turning into a zombie. I feel like I'm running at my red line every day. I'm maxing out, and still I'm actually not in a place where I really want to be in my life.
Yeah.
My career's not as good as it could be,
Yeah.
and um, I'm realizing that I am carrying all this sort of like emotional crap from
Yeah.
previous relationships, from childhood, and
Yeah.
I don't know what to do, man. And feels like everything's like all the pieces are sort of like blown apart in my life, and
Yeah.
I don't know how to pick them all up.
Yeah.
And this is why my men's course is called the Integrated Man, because it's
Nice.
about sort of reclaiming different sides of yourself and bringing it back. And I don't take guys through any somatic stuff yet, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna do some.
Soon.
I'm gonna do this course that you've got coming up soon, so that I'm
Yeah.
somatic and trauma informed in my practice, and maybe then I'll add
Mm,
that to the course. But
mm.
this seems like a really important piece. Like, you got to get into your body, because
Yeah.
when your life is a mess like that,
Yeah.
you're missing the information that's right in front of you. It's like you're ignoring it every day because you're used to just putting on the blinders, putting on the glasses,
Yeah.
just getting done what's in front of you and
Yeah.
repeating the same pattern.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's all about tuning into the body and listening more to
Yeah.
what's really happening in your life.
Yeah. I mean, it
Mm,
reminds me of someone I was coaching recently, or last couple of years actually, as successful as you could ever imagine. And then some more.
yeah.
And was never felt like he mattered, like that he did anything of substance, that in his relationship was really challenged, and was just fundamentally unhappy, and thought, after you reach $1 billion, shouldn't you just be like, I made it, I did it, and da da da. And and the reality was like nothing felt good. And when we started, I said, we're going to do somatics, we're going to get you more connected to your body. And he resisted. And like, it was so foreign, it was such a foreign concept. And he kept saying, like, what, this is just tell me what to do in my life. If you just tell me what to do, life will be better. And I kept pushing back. I was like, we'll get to that if you really need, but can we see what it might be like for you to be feel like it's okay to even be in yourself, let alone chasing all these other things that you've already achieved but never feel like you achieved. And I think a lot of us might be able to relate to that.
Yep.
And through the years, the I mean, he's now able to talk about his feelings, talking about the sensations in his body and the meaning. And he told me the other day, he was like, not that I ever need to hear this, but he was like, you're right. You're right. I chased every other possibility to be happy, to be satisfied. And all of those were just a way to run away from myself.
Mhm.
And coming back to myself, I have these moments that have turned into hours, and these hours that have turned into days of actually feeling like I'm satisfied, I'm here in the world,
Mhm.
and that I feel like I mean something. I mean something to myself, I mean something to my family. And it's just a beautiful transformational process that we can run towards all these other objectives or goals. And we might achieve them, and for a moment, this brief moment, it might feel satisfying, but then it's never really addressing um, the underlying hurt or the underlying pain that's
Yeah.
entrapped in our body,
Yeah.
that's waiting to be released, that's waiting to be transformed.
Mhm. Yeah, I can't tell you how many successful guys I know who had that a similar thing going on. That the thing that creates an extreme drive to succeed is often a big wound.
Yeah.
And some guys, they will chase that till the day they die,
Yep.
or some guys will chase it till they get success, and then they'll become addicted to success or money or drugs or all the above. And
Yep.
that will eventually take them down.
Yep.
But the most beautiful stories I've seen is where guys and gals
Yeah.
amass great sort of wealth and status in the world, and then come to that healing,
Yeah.
like your client did, and then turn that around and help the world.
Yeah.
Open their hearts to the world and
Yeah.
stop chasing it. And
Yeah.
for that reason, we need more workers like you. The thing that I'm noticing the most, well, one thing I'm noticing is like, as a person who has healing conversations with people like almost all day long. Somatic
Yeah.
therapy comes up almost every day. It's like, have you
Yeah.
tried somatic therapy yet? Like I'm always checking what people have tried and what they've done. Have you read this
Yeah.
book, or have you
Yeah.
done this? And
Yeah.
we're always, I'm in Vancouver, and we're like, have you done somatic therapy? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, I think, judging by how your nervous system's working here, like, maybe you should check that out. And then, oh, but actually everybody's full, and
Yeah.
there's a 6-month wait list for somatic therapists. And like the demand right now is like way outstripping the
Oh
supply
yeah.
of
Yeah.
somatic therapists, somatic workers, and somatically
Yeah.
informed people. So
Yeah.
uh, what do we do? What do we do about this? How do we get more somatic therapists so that people can
I,
benefit from this?
I mean, that's truly one of the reasons I created the Embody Lab, which is, this online hub of somatic training programs. So, we have one in the fall, which I know you're coming to, which I'm excited to
Hmm.
hang out with you
Yep.
there.
Yep.
Which is the integrative somatic trauma therapy program. And I'm so excited about that program. Like, it's been a dream program for a lot of reasons. Like I said before, there are a lot of different somatic modalities in the world right now. And what we wanted to come back and say was like, whoa, 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 there's so many great things, but where is what is the foundation? If we integrate all of these modalities back into what is the foundations, what is the essential things every somatic therapist needs to know, and then how do we sprinkle these really incredible uh, tools or techniques on top of that? And I come from a community health background. And so one of the things we wanted to look at was like, there's so much focus on the individual healing process. And one of the things I love about what you do, Ben, is that you work with groups.
Hmm.
And it's, bless you, it's not easy. I know.
Yeah.
It's not. And it takes a real special person to do big group work like that.
Yeah.
And one of the things we were really interested in is like, how do we not just treat trauma from a somatic approach? How do we prevent it? How do
Hmm.
we create more resilience in our culture? How do we how do we support movements or organizations to bring in more of a somatic trauma informed resilience approach,
Yeah.
so that we don't have to have as many individual sessions, because um, we're able to support it on multiple levels of prevention and treatment.
Hmm.
And so this program really addresses both. How do you deal with collective trauma, so big groups, culture, the world, and the prevention of that, or more resilience, and how do you treat the individual?
Uh-huh. It's very exciting to me that this is being offered. Um,
Mhm.
Personally, having done an addictions counseling degree and having done a lot of other sort of personal growth work, certificates, breath work, conscious relationship training, shadow work type stuff, and men's work leadership.
Yeah.
Um, I really do feel like this is something that I need to learn, and that I think maybe other men's leaders need to learn. For me, as you're describing, like, what the course is about, I'm like, yeah, I really do need to learn this, because in a men's group, like in the type of men's work that I do, we say that one of the things that keeps the group alive is the element of fire, and a
Mhm.
man bringing his fire to
Mhm.
the group. And sometimes that generally looks like whatever your authentic truth is in the moment, emotionally, like whatever's coming through you. It might be anger, it might be frustration, or it might be you know hurt,
Yeah.
tears. But um the worst thing that can happen in a men's group is where guys hold back their stuff, their truth. They hold back what their thoughts are about each other, their judgments of each other, and they just sort of start to pull their energy back, and the group dies. The
Yeah.
energy in the group dies. And conversely, when we encourage men to give each other direct feedback
Yeah.
about, listen, you're talking too long. That's my experience of you. You talk way too much. I don't feel that about you, but that happens in group, right?
Yeah.
You're here to talk. I'm here to listen. But in the group, that comes up, or like I see, a childish, like you're playing a victim in your life right now,
Yeah.
and I just want you to know that's what I think, and I need to say that. I need to get that off my chest, or this energy that from you, I'm repulsed by this energy, or I'm attracted to this energy. That sort of authentic interaction between men, and it can be very confronting.
Yeah.
And but it's interesting how, like, when it's done right, when it's facilitated well, and we have all the right pieces, and there's a lot of trust in the group, man, we get tighter, we get
Yeah.
closer, we get tighter with each other. We really become like a band of brothers, and we
Yeah.
trust each other more when we know that the other guy's just going to speak his truth, whether he likes something or not,
Yeah.
about us or about what's going on in the group. And so that's cool. But at the same time, we have guys in the squad who have like big wounds around rejection from men, or from the father, or
Yeah.
the essential masculine,
Yeah.
and they're triggered by each other's traits.
Yeah.
Whether it's just the way a guy walks, or a guy's status. You might have a guy who's like a cop in the group, and another guy who used to be a drug dealer or something like that. And usually for me though, it's more like the way that guys deliver feedback to each other. Sometimes it's just like a little too sharp, and the guy receiving it has received some really sharp feedback in his life, has been maybe bullied, and boom, he's triggered.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so to be able to work through that in group in the moment,
Yeah.
I do
Slow it
feel like,
down.
yeah, I
Yeah.
need more of those skills, because
Mm.
sometimes in those moments, it's not fire that you need. It's like not going to heal the thing.
it's
Uh,
it's it's time, space, permission, support.
uh,
It's yeah, yeah, yeah.
time,
And
space, permission, support.
yeah,
Yeah. So I look forward to learning more of that, and practicing more of that. And um, I appreciate that you're putting this out into the world, and like that you're responding to the thing that, a couple of years ago when I was talking to my wife Shalina about this, I was like, man, somebody really needs to start training somatic practitioners, because there's a huge demand, you
yeah,
know, um,
um,
and like we need a university of just somatic workers, that
yeah,
people can go and get training in. So the
yeah.
Integrative Somatic Trauma Therapy certificate is this one that's coming in the fall, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We like to go with long names.
Yeah. And it's great because there's like, it seems like, I don't know the whole somatic world, but it's not just you. Like, it seems like there's like the who's who of somatic therapists. Like
Yeah,
everybody's going to be there
yeah,
to contribute to the training, which seems really cool as well.
yeah. A lot of the sort of what I would call my like parent somatic parents,
Yeah.
like
Right.
are actually in this program, which is like it's such a blessing, to have a relationship with them and for them to want to collaborate with each other in this way. Because in other, even in some other forms, like my experience in yoga or breath work, it can feel
Hmm.
very like like it can very feel very sectional,
Linear.
or
Right.
yeah, or just
Yeah.
like everyone's like, even competitive
Yeah.
and
Well, it's not culty, but what's the clicky?
clicky. It can be
Yeah.
clicky, and I love that in this somatics world. It's like all these people who started their own schools are friends with each other,
Hmm.
and the fact that they're all coming together in this program and collaborating is such a gift, and I think is speaks to the what the work does.
Yeah.
The ability to actually um, feel comfortable within oneself and not need to that sense of competition or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing this. That's very cool. I
Thank you.
hope the training goes well. I hope people check it out. I've got an affiliate link for the program, actually, that
Yeah,
I'll share with listeners in the show notes and on my website, so people can click the affiliate link to sign up.
yeah,
And people just go to the Embody Lab
yeah,
to find this training and
yeah,
the other certificates that you offer.
yeah. Do a couple different ones. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks,
Thank you so
Dr. Scott. I
much.
really appreciate the open, honest intro conversation that we could have here around somatic therapy. And I think maybe someday if we could do like a part two, I'm sure that this training's like a 60-hour training, and I'm sure I'm going to have lots of breakthroughs and stories to tell and more questions to ask. So I'd love to have you on the show again sometime just to dig in.
We'll do a before and after.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
A before and after the training. Yeah, that
Yeah,
sounds fun, actually.
yeah, yeah. Right on.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. Thank you for doing the work that you're doing in the world, helping people, be less disembodied, connect to themselves, come back to themselves, back to earth, and
Mm.
healing
Mm.
little bits at a time. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you for your work.
Yeah. All right. All the best. We'll see you soon.